Thank you very much, colleagues. I understand that there are a couple of amendments that are still floating before we can close and rise. Senator Toniata, I believe you have a quick amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make an amendment to delete the following sections on the following pages. Give me the... Yes. Section 3 on page 57, Section 4 on page 60, Section 4 on page 63, and Section 3 on page 78. And these are the transfer restrictions on those sections.
Any... Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you know, with regards to these particular provisions, I'm very appreciative of the communication that has been taking place or took place a little earlier this morning, requesting for a little bit of budgetary flexibility. And considering that it impacts the public safety agencies, I think it really comes down to what is our overall intent and our goal in this process is to allow for sufficient cash management so this government of Guam, regardless as to which priority areas, education, public safety, or healthcare, can continue to operate at the optimum. So, Mr. Chairman, with regards to the amendment, I do not have any concerns because it's a dialogue between appropriate entities, between the legislative branch and representatives of the executive branch. But certainly, this is a tool that's being granted, and I certainly hope that it is utilized wisely. Just for the information of the body, my understanding that even in the last fiscal year, despite not having this particular provision, GPD had to exhaust all of its allocation with the exception of about $36,000. So I just wanted to set that for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to understand this now. Removing these provisions, these are transfer authority restrictions. And so basically removing them would allow the governor to transfer money out of the police department, out of Department of Corrections, out of these other public safety agencies that have always chronically been in need of funds towards the end of the fiscal year. My question to the chair is, the governor submitted a budget that was $55 million higher than what we're dealing with right now. And when the committee presented this budget that was $55 million lower, the governor came back with some very strong statements towards the committee about how reducing that amount was going to risk furloughs. So they must be incredibly confident about that $55 million. My question now is, why are we going to need to remove these transfer authority restrictions and create flexibility if they were so certain about that money to the point where they're willing to make the accusation of furloughs and put this government on notice about that? I mean, where is the reality and where is the consistency? Do you need flexibility because money's tight? Or are there going to be furloughs because we're being more disciplined and we're not trying to spend $55 million more? That's a gross inconsistency. So what's the deal? And that speaks right back to the whole thing that I brought up about BBMR and the reality of numbers. And I'm not trying to be difficult or facetious, but let's be real and let's be consistent.
Okay, I understand. And I have no response to that. Any objection to the removal of those four sections? Thank you. I believe, Madam Speaker, you have an amendment?
Yes, I do. And everyone should have a copy. It's for a new section on miscellaneous appropriations. It's appropriation to the Guam Police Department for the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve. This is the Police Reserve program. So the sum of $200,000 is appropriated from the fiscal year 2016 Tourist Attraction Fund to the Guam Police Department for Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve training, stipends, and equipment. And Mr. Chairman, this actually is also in concert with the recent announcement that the police is taking to provide more a presence of our police officers in the villages. And there was a call out for the police reservists to please come back, and even the Cape individuals to come back as well to provide some services. My understanding is that there's about 100 of them, but only 25 has actually answered the call, primarily because the department has been unable to provide the stipends. Sometimes it will take anywhere between 6 months to 1 year to pay. And the other is that when they do come in, they really have no equipment whatsoever. Now, to be able to bring back the other 75, then that was the reason for the inclusion of training, because they would need to have some kind of a refresher type of training, even though I'm sure they are, up to speed. So that is what the amendment is for. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
On the WAMPAT amendment, Senator Agon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vice Speaker, I just want to thank the good speaker for identifying the funds. If I can make an amendment, Mr. Chairman, only because this does not modify the revenue projection in the fiscal year 16 budget, if there can be appropriate language that has already been utilized in the past, that in excess of the revenue projection, because that would delineate that in fact these are anticipated revenues above and beyond what was adopted by this body back in fiscal year 16's budget consideration. So, Mr. Chairman, if I can just make an amendment that the Legislative Council be given the flexibility to ensure that this language is reads that is any revenues in excess of the projected fiscal year 16 TAF funds. Thank you, and I thank the speaker for identifying the additional $200,000 so that in fact the stipends not only can be paid, but she's absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, that the police reserves, they were able to identify approximately 25 that actively want to continue to contribute to the community in terms of serving in this capacity. The challenge has been that in trying to pull in the additional 75 plus individuals under the registration of the police reserves, the challenge is that they all have to go through a recertification process. So that is where the training component comes in, and certainly equipping them with the proper resources so that they can provide direct service to our community. Public safety service is very critical. So I thank the speaker for coming up and identifying the additional revenues, and then I certainly stand in support of this. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other senator on the amendment? Any objection? I think we've completed everything, Mr. Majority Leader. Oh. Oh, and on the main amendment, any objection? On the motion to rise?
Mr. Chairman, may I
Yes.
have a moment to say a few words about
Please.
the budget? Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And there we go. Dear colleagues, I'm really just reading a letter that I'm sending to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, there are three kinds of services for which a body must be absolutely prepared to fund: the protection of our people in the form of public safety, the health of the people in the form of services provided by public health, the hospital, behavioral health and wellness, and last but not least, the education of our youth. Invariably, as we go out and we talk to the people, we draw attention to these three items. And we sometimes say that they are sacred. We often say that they are critical and essential. And these are the words that we use. In our ads, we sometimes say the same thing, or we tell our life story. Our best life stories are about our experiences with safety for our families, health care for the ones we love, and our worries about the education of the next generation and the one after them. But I have to express my frustration and concern that when it comes to making decisions, about the next generation, and when we consider next year's budget, education comes up short. Every year, the Guam Department of Education comes in with a large request, and every year, we don't give them what they request. They think we ignore it. We're giving them the same amount as last year, and we essentially do the same for the Guam Community College and the University of Guam. But throughout the year, we talk about the next generation. But in August, when we talk about next year's budget, the next generation fades into discussions about how to fund special projects or redirect funding to agencies that we care about. This is our pattern, and I have observed it as an educator, and now for the second year in a row as a freshman center. I understand that we have to make tough decisions. I understand that we have to state our priorities. But I don't understand how we can continue to talk about the next generation and then ignore them year after year. There are thousands of employees out there, classroom teachers, building administrators, special educators, clerks, maintenance workers, and school aides who will continue to make do. They will continue to do their job professionally. They will open their own checkbook to deal with supply shortages. They will stay after school to prepare for tomorrow, go home, eat dinner with their loved ones, and then prepare some more. They go around the island looking for bargains, looking for educational opportunities, worrying about the next generation, not as a collective group of young faces, but by individual faces. A 9-year-old boy, a 12-year-old girl, a kindergartner, Cheryl, Jose, Hurao, Tasi, Haani, and Isa. They know their names and they know their conditions. They don't have the time to come here and lobby, even though maybe they should. They are perhaps used to thinking that we just don't care about their day-to-day reality, their day-to-day hard work on behalf of children and the next generation. There is no getting around the fact that we have shortchanged our educational system and our institutions. As a freshman center, I often second-guess myself how best to advocate for the needs of students, educators, and families. Sometimes I sit here and marvel at your ability to identify pathways for special funds. I am still learning the legislative knowledge and skills that many of you have. But I come here as a mother, grandmother, retired educator, and I could not let this moment pass without stating my deepest respect for educators of all stripes and of all categories, and without expressing my concern that we are not doing them or the next generation justice. This is why I put forward my lapse funds to go to the Department of Education. I am not trying to show anybody up. I am only doing what I know I could do within my experience in this body, which is to work with all of you when I can and by myself when necessary. Therefore, dear colleagues, I urge you to consider putting your office lapses into the GDOE accounts, as well as it may not make that much of a financial difference, but it would put our words about the next generation into next year's budget. It will speak volumes that we all care for the next generation. Si Ju's maasi, no I tiempon medyo.
Thank you very much, Senator. Majority Leader, a motion? Motion to rise.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having concluded the discussion on this budget, I also want to join all the senators here that recognized your leadership as well as your not only your ability but the ability of OFB to navigate each of us throughout this very sometimes tenuous process. Mr. Chair, you've been extremely open and transparent and accommodating, and you certainly gave every single member of this body every opportunity and every latitude to provide whatever amendments necessary to work within your office, the Office of Finance and Budget, and everyone else to find those resources to make those priorities to health, education, and public safety. And so, having said all of that, and having been very clear about what you've done to bring us to this point, also repeating what you've done in the last budget cycle, which is the current fiscal year budget, had you not recognized that the revenue projections needed to be reduced by some 37 million, we can only imagine the state of affairs of our current government if we were spending at that level. And given this budget that recognizes an additional $60 million reduction in the proposed revenue projections as proposed, it's going to be able to get all of us to be extricated from this $120 million deficit that we're facing as a community. So those concerns that were raised by the previous speaker and all of our concerns that we continue to raise collectively certainly will continue to be addressed. And so I move that we rise from the Committee of the Whole on the matter of Bill 250-33 COR as substituted by the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudication and further amended in the Committee of the Whole, and that all the amendments made therein remain intact with the body's recommendation to pass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Leader. Is there any objection to the motion to rise?
The legislature is back in session. The legislature have risen from the Committee of the Whole, and the chair recognizes the Vice Speaker, the chairperson of Budget and Appropriations.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to report that the Committee of the Whole has risen with a recommendation to do pass Bill 250 as substituted by the committee. And I realize that today is it's Thursday, and so I would ask that we reconvene on Monday at 3 unless you notify us that you want a different date for the voting on the bill as as reported out. Okay.
Okay, on that motion then, hearing no objections, so ordered. Okay, so we are in recess until Monday at 3.